This happened early, around 5 or 6 in the morning, and I was fast asleep. I was about 10 years of age. So I was sleeping and gradually woke up in a nice, relaxing way. I didn't jump up or startle or anything like that. I rolled over to face the wall. I always go to sleep in this position. And as I rolled over, there was a man dressed in all white, with a white glow around him. In his hands he had rosary beads, and he was praying with his head bent down toward the ground. At this point I was literally frozen solid with fear and stuck in the spot I was in. I pulled the covers up over my head for a split second, and then realized that I could move, and I ran downstairs to my parents' room. "I've seen a ghost. There's a ghost in my room," I said. "Son, there's not. You've had a nightmare. Go back to bed." I refused to go back to my room. I fell asleep in their bed. A couple of hours later, the house phone rang, probably at around 7 or 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning, which is highly unusual. My dad answered the phone. "Hello? What? How? Right, okay, I'm up. I'll be over as soon as I can." "Is everything okay?" my mom asked. "No, my brother Tony has died." I never met my Uncle Tony. He lived in England and we live in Ireland. He was only 30 and died peacefully in his sleep. My dad brought some photos to show me who he was and to tell me about him. And that's when I realized this was the man who had been kneeling beside my bed praying. My grandmother is one of those people who seems to just be naturally susceptible to paranormal activity. She's in her late 70s and has numerous stories about all sorts of spooky and unexplainable encounters she's had throughout her life. She used to keep me entertained for hours, with me getting her to constantly tell and retell her stories again and again. It's the way she tells them, I think, that really invokes a sense of fear. Hopefully, I can do her justice with my recounts, as she's not quite up to speed on Reddit. The house she grew up in throughout the 50s was haunted, undoubtedly. We'll start with the time that she was walking home from school as a 10-year-old girl. She grew up in Belfast, Northern Ireland, in a typical city-style terraced house, maybe 50 houses joined together on a long, narrow street. There was no one immediately around her as she walked home from school one brisk January afternoon, except for one gentleman walking maybe 20 yards in front of her. He was wearing a long black overcoat with a bowler hat, not something that would raise any eyebrows at the time. Suddenly, my grandmother noticed the man stop in front of her house, open the little gate at the front of the small garden, walk the 5 yards down the path to her front door, open it, and enter the house. Still, she thought nothing of this, simply assuming the man was a friend of her parents, or a colleague of her father's of some kind. Oddly, however, when she got to the front door and went to open it not moments after the man, the door was locked. She thought this strange, as the man had just pushed it open and walked in. Not too weird though, right? Someone may have just locked the door behind him. What was strange, however, was that upon entering the house not 45 seconds after the man in black did, she found herself to be the only one in the house. No parents, no man in black, nobody. My grandmother often speaks of the noises she used to hear lying in her bed at night. And by noises, I mean a horrible, blood-curdling wheeze, coming from, of all places, directly under her bed. She described it as the long, drawn-out breaths that you would imagine coming from a 90-year-old, 40-a-day smoker on their deathbed. This would happen night after night after night. She used to run downstairs to tell her mother about the man under her bed, but her mother was a stern Christian woman and would have nothing to do with it, often scolding her and sending her back to bed for telling the devil's tales. She explains how she used to just cover her head with blankets and pray for the wheeze to stop, crying herself to sleep most nights. The last story that I'll mention for now again takes place in the same house. My great-grandfather was a policeman and often worked in a regular shift pattern. The house had a small hallway upon entering the front door, around 5 by 5 foot, just large enough for a coat rack and the stairs to begin. Immediately to your right when entering the front door was the living room. Most evenings after dinner, my grandmother would sit in the living room and listen to the radio with her sister, while her mother knitted or sewed. Rather regularly, they would hear the front door unlock, open and close, the hall light switch flick on, and the rustle and knock of a coat being removed and thrown on the coat rack. My great-grandmother would say, "Oh, that must be your father home," or something of the sort, before going to greet him in the hallway. On numerous occasions, though, they wouldn't be able to find him immediately and they would assume that he'd gone upstairs. They would go upstairs to welcome him home, but to no avail. There would also be no coat on the rack. And then, 15 or 20 minutes later, her father would arrive home. It just so happens that my grandmother found out years after moving out of that house that a single man had lived there alone for years and died in the very room that she slept in as a child. Apparently, he had some kind of respiratory condition. There was an old stone mill where I lived. It takes a while to walk to the mill, and on a number of occasions in my life, I would enjoy walking there. A lot of weird things happened, and this is one of those times. Basically, I live in a town that used to be the capital of Ireland during the medieval ages. The town has a castle in the center and a canal that runs along one side, that in turn leads to the mill in question. I only say this because it's important later on. One day, 2 of my friends and I decided to go for a walk down to the mill to see if anything would happen. 10 minutes into our long journey, and it started. A groaning. It was the oddest thing. It was so loud that I thought it was one of the other lads, but it really wasn't. It just sounded so fake. Literally sounded like anyone pretending to be a zombie. I mean, it was so fake sounding I genuinely wasn't even scared. The canal was to our left and the wall of the castle to our right. The castle is closed at night and security patrols the castle grounds. I genuinely just thought that someone was in the castle grounds on the opposite side of the wall and was just trying to freak us out. It didn't work though, I thought. It was so random at the start. One of the guys was getting some sort of panic attack. He claimed he had a dream the night before about a girl dressed in white roaming around his house, and that she had caused his grandfather to pass away. He was convinced the dream was connected to what was happening, but we continued on anyway. The groaning continued the entire way until we reached the halfway point of our journey to the mill. The halfway point is just a car park. The trees open up to reveal the sky. It's one of the only places during this walk where trees aren't covering your head. At this point, one of the lads wanted to have a cigarette, so we stopped. And then, it happened. I don't really know how to explain this, but it's almost like there was a flash of black over the sky. Even though it was dark, it was like in a split second the sky just flashed black. Blink and you'll miss it, but we didn't miss it. Right after this, the groaning got so loud, like it was all around us, but there was nothing there yet. Yet the sounds were so loud and so real. The friend who'd had the panic attack let out a noise of pain. And then, everything stopped. No groaning, no rushing water from the canal, no nature. Just him groaning in pain. He begged us to look at his back because it was burning, and sure enough, he had 3 scratches the length of his back, from the base of his neck all the way down to his lower back. We used the road that leads to the car park to get out of there. I never really knew how to explain this, as some people just claim it's all explainable, but honestly, to this day, I've never seen the sky flash black like that. I've never heard groaning like that, especially when there's nothing and nobody around to do it. A few weeks later, a friend of mine, Scott, told us of an old legend of a headless horseman who would ride up and down the canal looking for his head. Apparently the groaning is his decapitated head. I guess it was just lucky for us that we didn't meet the rest of him. I started working as a civilian in the mod, which meant that I spent 6 months living on an RAF base, Odiham, Chinooks. For around a week, I woke up every single morning at the same time. I can't remember which hour it was, but it was on the hour, either 1 a.m. or 3 a.m., dead on. I know because I texted my girlfriend daily as it happened. Usually things like, woken up again. And then I remember by the end it was sort of a running joke. Yep, right on schedule, 3 a.m., wide awake. This happened for 2 weeks. Sometimes I would hear a noise in my room from the cupboard. One day the sink started dripping. This was a very old building, World War I era, built in 1925, and it's used to film scenes of Downton Abbey. On the final day this happened, my TV turned on to a terrestrial TV channel. I had no aerial in it. There was no aerial around. It was literally a shell that I plugged my memory stick in to play whatever films I'd downloaded onto it. There was 100% no way that any sort of TV signal could be getting into this old-style flat screen that required an aerial. I got up groggily and turned it off, went back to bed, shut my eyes, and the sound of static started coming out of the TV, getting louder and louder, as if somebody was increasing the volume. The TV screen was off. I literally ran up and ripped the plug from the socket, and it stopped. As I got into bed though, and turned my light off, I noticed the red on and off LED at the bottom of the set, flickering. I texted my girlfriend and basically said, "What's going on?" and laughed to myself when I noticed the time. 3 a.m. on the dot. I just went back to sleep. As my time on that base went on, I got edgier and more nervous around the wardrobe. I don't know why. Nothing happened to it, but I remember constantly having to check that nobody was in there. Like, the longer my stay on that base was, the more paranoid I got that somebody, or something, was in there. My first duty station was Naval Station Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. I know, rough gig for a 19-year-old kid, right? I was a military police officer. I was there from 2004 to 2007 and bounced between bases. Near the end of my time, I got reassigned to the Naval Magazine in Iwa Beach and patrolled that base from early 2007 until I transferred in October. This base is comprised of the main magazine complex in Iwa itself, the old base at Barbers Point in Kapolei, and another magazine complex at Nanakuli. For my first couple of months, as my welcome aboard and as the newest, most junior guy, I got the lucky experience of patrolling the main mag area on night shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. This area is approximately 7,000 acres of pitch-dark ammo magazines spread throughout the woods, the only light being from your headlights and overheads. Once you make your way to the gate of the mag area, I always had to park the truck, get out, and walk to the gate, open it, drive through it, then get back out and lock the gate behind me. I always had the weirdest, creepiest feeling that I was being watched from the woods whenever I had to get out and open the gate. Mind you, to the left of the woods was an old abandoned base housing neighborhood that was closed down in the mid-1990s due to budget, and it was completely overgrown with vegetation. Because I worked night shift, patrolling this large complex of row upon row of ammo magazines intermixed with dense vegetation was the scariest experience of my life. Normally, I would just haul ass from the complex gate down to the piers where the only lights were located, and move all my vehicle mirrors so that they faced inward, and there was no way I could look at them for fear of seeing something behind me. I absolutely hated making my rounds, and those 8 hours, from 2200 to 0600, were the most dreaded feeling I ever had when assigned to Mag Patrol. There were times that radios would play music in the little shacks used by the day workers on the pier, maybe left on by the workers when they left, that I would shut off, and when I made my way back an hour or so later, those things would be playing music again. There were buildings that I would just speed past, because I swear that things were watching me from whatever was left of the windows. I never, ever turned my lights off. Those poor patrol vehicles. I always had my interior lights on, high beams, alley lights, takedowns. I mean, I was a one-man light show spectacular. Some of the older Department of Defense police would refuse to patrol the main mag complex because of stories that had been passed down over the years. The reason why they never used their mirrors was because of the story of a woman in a white dress who wandered the complex and would appear in your rearview mirror at random times. It's a practice I quickly adopted, turning my mirrors inward, like I said before. With total seriousness, I told my supervisor every evening that I was assigned to Mag Patrol that if my vehicle ever broke down out there in those woods, in pitch darkness, all alone, with the only set of keys in and out, well, it was a pleasure working with him, because I was not going to sit in that dark and wait for help to arrive. You can read between those lines. I am active Navy and spent a little over 2 years in Seoul, Korea. Awesome experience, tons of things to see. My work schedule was pretty nice, only worked half the month. We call it the Panama schedule for those who don't know what I'm talking about. But anyway, a few times a year my work would ask for volunteers to do a security detail that spanned over a whole month. It'd consist of tops 4 guys for a whole month. We were given the house, individual rooms, kitchen, gym, etc. This assignment was on a military base, but on that military base, our house and facilities were also gated, and only cleared numbers, so just the 4 of us for the month, were allowed in. You had to have a code to get inside our gate as well as a code to get inside the house. Pretty well secured to say the least. There were 2 buildings within our gated and secured area, one being the house we lived in, and no more than 30 feet away was the other building that we worked out of. Usually, there was one person working a watch shift. It was always manned. So I just get off my watch and I go into the house to relax. I go about my nightly routine and take my uniform off and get ready for a shower. Our bathroom has 1 shower and 3 toilet stalls. Not a big bathroom either. Anyway, I'm the only one awake. 1 guy is in the other building standing watch, and the other 2 are passed out in their private rooms. I turn the shower off and grab my towel. Directly in front of the shower is the wall to one of the stalls, and I hear as clear as day the sound of a toilet paper roll being rolled, as if someone was grabbing the paper. The typical gung 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 sound, if you know what I mean. I figured someone was using it, no big deal, right? I didn't say anything, that'd be rude, and I just continued drying off and I pulled the curtains back and walked to the sink as I looked in the mirror. That stall door was open, and no one was in there. I opened the bathroom door because it was closed this whole time, and the 2 other people were still in their rooms, totally passed out. I knew I wasn't hearing things or tripping out. It's impossible to get into the bathroom without the doors making noise. They're really loud. It's kind of weird, right? But here's my favorite encounter. It could have been within the same month that I was already there at this facility, but I can't say for certain because I did multiple trips to this place, and something always happened. But almost the same scenario. I got off watch and I was watching a movie in the living room with the lights off. 2 guys were sleeping in their rooms, doors closed, and the 4th person was in the other building on watch. Out of nowhere, I hear the front door, which is metal, being tugged really hard, as if somebody was trying to open it after they put in the door code. The front door didn't open due to whoever putting in the code doing it wrong, I suppose. I've heard the same sound countless times. I was like, maybe it's a contractor who's supposed to be here and tried getting in but forgot the code, and now he'll try the rear entrance to get in since there is no code there. It's just a free swinging door. So I waited a couple of seconds to see if anybody was going to walk in, and no one did. I get off the couch and go through to the rear to see if anybody's out there, and nobody was. The other two people were still fast asleep, and the other one was still working. Not a single car in the parking lot. I still can't figure out what that was. And no, it wasn't the wind either. It was dead still. But the one thing that makes me confident in what I heard and experienced was my last trip to this facility. It was when I was on watch. 3 of my other guys came storming in the building, freaking out, because they all experienced the same thing. It was super late at night. It was just the 4 of us total in our gated area, highly secure like I said. Those 3 were watching a movie in the living room while I was in the building behind them. That's when they heard the sound of someone yanking on the front door, trying to get in. There was no one on the compound, no car in the lot. It was just us. Every single one of them heard the same thing I did, and when they came into the building I was working in, I described my experience to them, and it was exactly the same as theirs. Kind of creepy, but I dig shit like this, so I was intrigued too. There were also some papers randomly falling in my workspace, and sounds of someone stomping on the floor of the workspace, but nothing like the experiences I just mentioned. Before I forget, as soon as I reported to my base in Korea, one of the airmen that I worked with said he saved a video from one of those security details because they caught a gray, hazy figure panning across one of the cameras in the middle of the night. I never saw the video, but multiple people that I worked with said that they had seen it, and with the things I experienced down there, I think it's safe to say that I believe it's credible. But yeah, that's what I experienced. In 2010, I was in Kyrgyzstan and was working MIDS, United States Air Force Security Forces. I was on a Delta patrol, which was in charge of a 2-mile wide field, watching over our planes as they landed and making sure that none of them were going to get blown up or shot at. Highly unlikely in that area. Anyway, it was around 2 in the morning and we got word on the radio that we had a plane coming in about 10 minutes. So we would go to the spot, just me and my Alpha, in an old 4-door Nissan truck that was handed down to us from Iraq. Our spot was on top of a hill in the middle of nowhere. There was an old abandoned barn from who knows when. Well, to give you a mental picture, there's a small little dirt road that leads up to the hill, surrounded by tall grass and marijuana plants. It was wild out there. And once we got to the top, we were met with the dark barn that was falling apart. Well, when I was up the hill, I turned the vehicle around to have the barn behind me and overlook the entire dark field. Once I was in position, I turned off the engine and lights, and I only had the radio on to some Russian music station. I pulled the handbrake, truck was a standard, and just sat back just to realize that my Alpha had fallen asleep. I thought to myself, hey, not a bad idea. I might as well take a short 15-minute nap as well. So as I turned the car stereo off and turned my handheld radio up, I heard a faint feminine scream coming from the barn. Keep in mind, we were the only people within a half-mile radius. It creeped me out, and I stayed super silent to see if I heard it again. Nothing. So I played it off and decided it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Well, I laid back in my seat just a little more and just started overlooking the field again, when all of a sudden the whole truck jerked violently, as if it had gotten rammed from behind by another vehicle. It was to the point where my Alpha woke up and started yelling, "What the fuck did you hit, dude?" And that's when I replied, "Dude, nothing, look where we're at. The car's off, I didn't do shit." We got out of the truck and got our flashlights and started looking around, thinking maybe some sort of big animal ran into us, or possibly a big mountain lion that was spotted in the area might have jumped on the truck bed. But we saw nothing. There were no signs of anything being up there with us. We even took out our night vision goggles and thermals and saw nothing. This is when we decided to just get out of there and go back to check up on the people at other posts and tell them our experience. I told them about the scream I'd heard earlier, and there were a few guys who said that they had heard it too, and that it bugged them to the point where they did a walk around of the barn. They saw that there was no way of getting in since everything was chained up, and the only way in was through a few of the open windows way up top. Till this day, none of us can explain how that sort of force was possible, with nothing physical being there to make it. Among the many ghost stories told during lull periods of lengthy military exercises, the one that stood out the most in Singapore is probably that of the third door of Charlie Company. In short, it was about how a third door was made to allow the spirit of a recruit who died a gruesome and mysterious death to leave peacefully. There was even a local movie made about the incident called Okay. There was even a local movie made about the incident called 2359 that you can find on YouTube. I have personally seen this third door, so there was at least some credence to the story. My story, however, happened many years later when the camp was largely unused. My company was planning to use the rifle range near the camp for our annual rifle proficiency test, which lasted several days. I was selected to be a part of the very small advance party that would arrive a few days before the main body. The barracks of the camp were essentially long houses, separated by their respective toilets and laundry areas. My platoon mates and I would occupy one of those long houses during the night, where we would play cards and tell creepy stories to pass the time. It was almost midnight, and I needed to relieve myself. I had just stepped out of the barrack when I noticed that the lights of the toilet belonging to Charlie Company had suddenly come on. The bright white light cast a clear shadow of a man onto the water area of the laundry. I froze. There was a voice telling me to go investigate, while another told me to grab my friends. The shadow didn't seem to budge at all during the entire time that I was observing it. Then I heard my friend calling for me. This snapped me out of my reverie as I rushed back in and pulled my friends out to show them what I saw. However, by then the lights had already gone off. My friend suggested that it was probably the range warden, which was the only logical explanation. What really puzzled me was that my friend called out to me because I'd been gone for too long. But in my mind, the whole thing had only lasted a minute or two. The next day I quizzed the range warden about the incident and asked him if he'd been out there. A worried look came over his face, and he explained that he was nowhere near the camp that night. What's more perplexing was that the power to Charlie Company had been cut off years ago. I'm stationed at the School of Infantry West on Camp Pendleton, California. Everything I'm telling you has been told to me by people who I trust, and people who have no reason to lie to me. 3 to 4 years ago, a young private, last name James, committed suicide on one of the rifle ranges during Marine Combat Training, or MCT. There was no note, and nobody knew why he did it. I was able to dig a little and confirm an obituary that matches the timeline, and a social media profile that goes silent around the time of death as well. Instructors at MCT have had inexplicable events occur at the place of his death. Gear falling off of shelves, cold spots, things like that. A group of students even bought a cheap Ouija board and tried to contact him one night. The next morning, visibly shaken, they wouldn't go into detail about what happened, other than hearing locker doors shut on their own and more objects falling. The instructor on duty that night began having disturbing dreams about his own house. He saw a cloaked figure in some kind of religious garb in a specific closet in his home. He never talked about it, but one day he got a call from his wife, and she brought up that their dog wouldn't stop barking and whimpering at that very same closet door. Finally, a different instructor, a staff sergeant, was out at the range where the private had died. It had started to get dark. He was absolutely the only one out there. Everyone else had left. He heard a voice saying, "Good evening, Staff Sergeant." He tried calling out and asking who it was, even looking out with a flashlight, but he found nothing. The voice kept repeating itself until eventually he got freaked out and left. I know troubled spirits can hang around for some of the same reasons that they would have taken their own life to begin with, not being able to let go, etc. This is the only reason why I believe any of it, other than that I trust the people who told me. Has anybody else heard similar things?